I can often predict who in my programs is going to make tremendous progress quickly and start changing their lives, and who is going to hit a wall. And the people who get stuck at the wall are those who are attached to their trauma-driven beliefs. Almost everybody who had childhood trauma, who's working on healing their ability to have healthy romantic relationships, starts out with these beliefs. That it's hopeless, that people are no good, that nothing's ever going to change. And you can see why holding on to these beliefs would not be nearly as effective as going in with an open mind. So for all of you who do want to heal in this part of your life, I want to share this video from my archive that identifies 10 huge trauma-driven beliefs that stop you from being able to change your trauma-driven dating patterns. Here it is. Sometimes the person who is sabotaging your happiness in relationships is not your ex, not your parents, not the people out there who put you down. Sometimes the person sabotaging you is you. And the problem with growing up with neglect and abuse is that it can drive your thinking, it can constrict what you believe is possible for your life, and it can make you see only the worst, only what is ugly. Now, these are what I call trauma-driven beliefs. And you might be holding on to them because you think that they'll protect you. But what they really do is keep you isolated. They lead you away from the good choices and the positive changes and the healthy people who are capable of love. These are the ones you need in your life, right? If you're ever going to overcome what happened to you in the past. Now, it's true that the part of us that's designed to detect good people and to feel love and receive love can get so damaged by early trauma. And the more trauma happens, the greater the risk that we'll get kind of stuck in the pattern, falling only for unavailable people or for people who hurt us, or getting so lost in fantasy that we miss out on any kind of real fulfillment from dealing with real people. But the good news is, healing from past trauma has the potential to completely change the course of your life. And you might be really discouraged about that right now, and you just think, yeah, everybody says that, but how do you actually do that? But I'm here to give you real hope. There really are ways to start healing the wounds of the past, now that we know what their nature is. And if you aren't familiar with my work, you'll find the courses and materials where I teach that in the description section below. But stay with me for right now. You can do that later if you want. Healing begins when you make a decision to question your trauma-driven beliefs. Now, I've had a few miracles in my life. And the one that changed my life the most happened the day that I stopped having crappy relationships. And at the time, I had no idea why the same old hurtful and humiliating problems kept happening. And in fact, they were getting worse, and I couldn't make them stop, even when other things in my life were going well. Now, admitting that my old ideas and behaviors weren't working, like at all, was the very first thing I did that just put a crack in the door, like opened it just a little bit to transformation. And at that time, I was so unhappy, and I was so ashamed of the relationships I kept finding myself in. I could see, how other people were seeing me. And I couldn't really see a way forward. And I'd always thought that if I just met the right guy or looked prettier or changed one small thing about myself, that love could just kind of like show up in my life and do the healing for me. But it had gotten really clear that all my old ideas about how to do relationships had gotten me to that one night where I was so alone and hopeless. And no one was coming to save me. And that if my life was ever going to get better, I was going to have to change. Now, if you've ever had to admit this kind of failure to yourself, you know how, like when you really let it in that like everything you've tried has failed, it actually feels like for a few seconds, it feels like you're going to die. But then, whoop, very quickly, a new feeling fills you up. And it's a sense of surrender and of peace. And then, thank God, possibility and even hope. And everything at this point depends on your willingness to get real and to take action and then keep taking action. Now, negative patterns, I happen to know, are very sticky. They're hard to get rid of. And even when they're gone, they try like hell to come back. And I tell the story of this transformation in my dating course that I mentioned earlier, that you can find down in the description section below if you're interested. So when the change in me started to become visible, I think it was very, very obvious to people. And friends were starting to ask me, like, what happened? How did you do that? And they were calling, and I started making appointments with them to show them my techniques. And soon I was sharing my principles with their friends, and people I didn't even know would call me because they heard I could help them break their trauma patterns. And then eventually I started a blog called Crappy Childhood Fairy, then the YouTube channel, and then the courses and the coaching. And this amazing community grew up around it all. And what we do here is we learn to shed trauma-driven beliefs and become open to a new way and a more practical and rational and self-loving way of living our lives. So we learn to heal brain dysregulation, which is really common with CPTSD, and we learn to operate in a regulated state. And I'm telling you, when you're regulated, everything makes sense about why it was so hard before. When you're regulated, it becomes possible to deprogram yourself. And deprogram is a strong word, I know, but deprogramming is exactly what has to happen when we've gotten stuck in an unconscious and repetitive and destructive cycle of behaviors and beliefs. Now, behaviors are at least partly driven by beliefs. And when we have childhood PTSD, a lot of our beliefs came from trauma experiences. Trauma beliefs are cultural, they're family learned, they're reinforced by friends who likely also have childhood PTSD. And we usually know what we're doing wrong, and we can try to make ourselves act normal, right? Normal. But this kind of symptom fixing is usually only temporary. You can't sustain it. Real change demands that we identify those trauma-driven beliefs and begin to replace them. Now, normal people seem to just know this stuff, but those of us programmed by trauma usually need stronger, clearer guidelines. You can't just give us platitudes, it doesn't work. And we can't just talk about things, that doesn't work. And just breathing, all the things that are positive that some people seem to find help so much, like we need more, we who have CPTSD. So what helps, in addition to getting re-regulated, is to have clear guidelines about how you're going to handle certain situations that are triggering for you, that are slippery, right? You set up guidelines in advance, and that might feel at first countercultural, like unnatural or even radical, right? To have rules for yourself. But that is how to deprogram and then reprogram yourself. And it works. And if you want to learn the techniques for that, please do check out the links I shared. But just to help you determine if you might be carrying some of those trauma-driven beliefs that might be blocking you from love, let's talk about 10 of them, okay? Number 1, this is huge. I hear this all the time. I attract unavailable people. It's not a problem, actually, who you attract. I always say, I attract mosquitoes, but I don't sleep with them. The problem is that you are attracted to unavailable people. That's the problem, that you connect with them, attach to them, let them into your life. Whether it's because they're married or addicted or immature or not into commitment or just plain not into you, they are unavailable. And if it happens once, it's really disappointing, right? If it happens again and again and it's your pattern, it's blocking you from any kind of real love. Now, we're often attracted to people who are, whether we see it or not, about the same as we are. It's we who might not be available, really, for the intensity and the risk and the responsibility of being in a real mutual relationship, especially when, our mental engine is racing with dysregulated emotions. So freeing ourselves from the notion that unavailable people just happen to us, they just fall out of trees and there we are, is the first step of deprogramming. It doesn't just happen. We're attaching to those people, okay? Number 2 is the belief that sex is how you find out if you're compatible. In the post-sexual revolution world, which is where I grew up, this is completely accepted by so many people I know as the way it is. It just is, right? But for people with childhood PTSD, sex can be more often how we bond with people who we don't know yet. before we really know if they're available or compatible with us. And then we're like bonded, and we have abandonment wounds, so we can't leave. And so we waste years trying to retroactively turn that person into who we hoped they were in the first place. We probably discovered like a couple days in that that's not what it was. So recovery sometimes means living by a different, more careful set of rules that helps us avoid those same old mistakes. And I call those the guardrails. And personally, I used and I teach a way of dating in a structured way so that you can know and be in touch with your own values and what's in your best interest, and prevent some of the stuff that happens when you're dysregulated or triggered from happening. You just kind of know what that's going to be, and you can set a guardrail against it. Like if I find myself trying to call more than once a day after the first date, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to like put my phone under the sofa. That's a guardrail. Because romance can make it really hard to think rationally about who to let into your life, especially if you have CPTSD. Number 3, another belief, you've probably been told this: I am always exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, I do get the basic idea that even hard times can help us grow, but it can also be a total rationalization that's used by people who are in abusive, rejecting, or intolerable relationships to explain why they can't or won't leave, and to perpetuate a fantasy that actually they're loved on some unseen level. And in fact, it's often an abuser who has drilled that into their minds. But other variations of that kind of magical thinking are, I know that this person is terrible to me, but we had this incredible past life together, or God told me to just love them through this, or we're here to learn a lesson from each other. They're my teacher, right? Have you heard this? It's very difficult for most people to face the truth of their lives, especially when they're in a rut and when they're feeling lonely. Having a good friend, having a mentor in this area can be so helpful so that you can avoid all those old mental traps, because they can call you on it. They can say, yoo-hoo, I think you might be doing that thing again. And when you've made the decision that you're ready to change, then you're going to seek out that help. You're not going to avoid help. You're not going to try to hide from everybody. You're going to find the help. You're ready to be lovingly called on that kind of magical thinking. That's what helps, is to go, oh, right. That's not true. Okay, carry on. All right, number 4, here's a belief. When a partner has been avoidant or not faithful or rejected you, and you think to yourself, well, probably that's understandable because they were hurt before and they have CPTSD, and that's why they're afraid of commitment. Okay, that could be true, but whatever a person's history, if they are unable or unwilling to love you and be with you, there it is. They're not partner material. They're not available. Now, understanding or trying to guess at the source of their feelings still won't get you loved. Moving on is sometimes the most direct route to finding love. Did you know that? You break up, you just became like that much closer to finding the one, because this one's not it. All right. So here's another thing I hear people say to rationalize staying with, hurtful people. Well, they had a lot of childhood trauma and that's why they self-medicate. So here's the truth. All alcoholism or drug addiction is self-medication. That's what alcohol and drugs are for, to medicate feelings, right? To feel better for people who feel bad. And for a little while it works, and after a while it causes a lot of problems that make people feel really bad, not just them, but everybody around them. But then it becomes necessary to them. Whatever you call it, self-medication, it's not some like special category that's workable. Addiction is addiction, alcoholism is alcoholism. I always recommend Al-Anon. It's a 12-step program for relatives and friends of alcoholics if you need help getting clearer thinking around that. But whatever you call it, serious drinking and using make a person unreliable, limited in terms of intimacy, possibly dangerous, and just flat out not a good dating prospect. So when it's a close family member or a spouse that's got substance problems, there are more compelling reasons to stay in their lives. But either way, it's really important to set your own boundary. Like, do not rationalize what they're doing. Okay, number 6. I realized that my ex is an abusive narcissist. And I want to send them a book I found on Amazon about abusive narcissists. Now, I know firsthand it is so hard to stop fixing people as a means to get control over an out of control situation, or to rationalize why you're not getting love. But if you're diagnosing an ex as a sick and terrible person, and you think that you should therefore go spend money and time thinking about them and making contact in order to help them, your trauma brain is doing the thinking, okay? Being honest with a mentor has the power to break the spell and set you free to keep living your life without that person, all right? Number 7, we're just friends. We're just friends, just friends. How many just friends have you had? How many times have you been with somebody who had some just friends and it caused you intense jealousy and pain? There are, in fact, relationships where exes can be friends. It's possible. But there are many where one person is pining away for the other one and is too scared to declare their feelings because it would be icky to the other person and they'd go away. Or B, one or both of you is using the other person to fill up time until real love shows up, pretending that the new significant others, they're just going to love those friends too. Well, they won't. They're not going to like you being kind of slightly emotionally entangled with people. That's not emotional availability. And healthy people can feel it. It's all sort of a crappy dynamic, and it puts up a sort of force field around you that telegraphs to them that you are not available. So people who would make good partners can intuitively sense that force field and they stay away. The only ones who get through it are the unavailable ones, the jerks, the people who are high. They don't even sense the force field at all. Healthy people are looking for that bright, shiny availability and they know how to recognize it. Number 8, I need closure. Have you ever said that? Have people said it to you? Now, this makes total sense to the trauma-driven mind, but in real life it means I'm making up an excuse to reconnect. I want another shot at this. So you know what I'm going to say. There are cases where there was a serious relationship or a marriage and somehow one person never found out why it ended. And I would say eventually having a conversation about that might be important. But closure usually is only going to be a slippery slope to get you entangled back in the very thing that's making you emotionally unavailable and unhappy because it's with an unavailable person. 9, that person is toxic. All right, there's toxic stress, there's toxic emotions, but the concept of a toxic person, and I get it, like I have people that I feel that way about, like I just sort of fill up with dread and horror and anger around them. But in fact, people, no matter how they behave, they're not actually like radioactive, they're not a virus. They can't hurt you just by being around. It's that being around them causes a toxic reaction. Because you know what? You have been in the presence of really horrible people just screaming at you on the street. I don't know, where I live, we have people who do that. And it's something you want to get away from, but it's not deeply destructive. It doesn't make you, break your heart because it's not true. So this belief in a toxic person, I think it's much more helpful to understand that the toxicity is happening in the PTSD reaction that it sets off in you, which is not your fault, but that is toxic to you. When you fill up with the dysregulated emotions, that adrenaline, that fight or flight or flee or fawn response, now you're in toxicity. It's you who, in a sense, has become the toxic person. You're poisoned, okay? So when we're around people who trigger us that badly, they might be very terrible, but it's always a dance with them. So if nothing else, your part in it that you can control is that you dance with them and you don't have to. And you basically got triggered by their behavior. And I'm not saying it wasn't bad behavior, but it caused you to get emotionally dysregulated and lose your balance. It's more realistic to acknowledge that you have a toxic reaction around certain behaviors and that it's actually possible to become, neutral to people who are selfish or manipulative or abusive. Don't get neutral to abusive people, but just people who are, just very, very unpleasant. Abusive people, you really just have to, there's a whole line of action that you have to take around that to sever it, including calling law enforcement. But I'm talking about people who are, very cruel, very demanding, telling lies, that sort of thing. It's you who's got to learn to have the boundaries around them and decide whether or not to have them in your company. And when you have that boundary, you'll find that you're not poisoned, all right? There are no good men or good women or good marriages. I hear that all the time. I used to think this is true, that all good men were taken and I better just stay stuck in a crappy relationship. But this too was a justification. I think it's common to feel that way after somebody has really, really hurt you, and it just seems like everybody's like that out there. But I'm telling you, it's not true. You're not like that, right? Having believed that for a long time, I'm really sorry I wasted so many years on this kind of trauma-driven thinking, because really what it does, it telegraphs to other people that you're prickly, that you're hurt, and it pushes away good people. So with the good people pushed away, the only people I had relationships with were people who were not so good to me, not good for me. And then I'd be wondering, why does this keep happening? I must just attract these jerks. But that's what it was. That's what it was. And I was carrying my trauma as a way of expressing myself in the world. And it just wasn't that pretty. It wasn't sexy. Now, sometimes you have to shed the bad relationships before you can see the good things that are possible for you, because the bad relationships are the very thing reinforcing your trauma-driven beliefs. It just keeps making it feel truer and truer. So I'm saying question your beliefs and take heart. Become open and willing. You may not be able to manufacture this transformation in yourself on command, but start taking the first steps. Be open and willing to see things in a new way. If you catch yourself thinking everybody's bad and nothing is possible, catch yourself and say, wait a minute, that can't possibly be true. That's probably my trauma-driven thinking. Remember, healing is possible. Hey, it's me in present time again. And if you love this video, I've got some tips for you on how to prepare yourself for a great relationship. It's a free PDF and you can download it if you want to click on it right here. And I'll see you very soon.